Hey y'all, welcome to the Southern Appalachian Herbal Podcast. I'm Judson Carroll and I'm an herbalist. I'm also a wild crafter, a gardener, and herb grower. I'm coming to you from high atop the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, just a stone's throw from the Tennessee line, overlooking the Pisgah National Forest. Absolutely surrounded by the bounty of God's green earth. I spent most of my life wandering these mountains and learning about plants from the old-timers and all sorts of characters. On this show, we'll talk about herbs and how to use them, how to find them, how to grow them, how to make preparations. We'll talk about a lot of things. We can also talk about permaculture, homesteading, foraging, and living off the land. Most anything, really. You can email me at southernappalachianherbs@gmail.com if you have a question or a comment. You can also contact me through the Grow Network, where I'm a regular contributor and a moderator for the forums. And my blog is, of course, southernappalachianherbs@blogspot.com. All right, y'all. I'm going to sit my guitar down and let's talk about herbs.
All right, hey y'all, welcome to this week's show. Today I have a really special interview with Jason White. Now, Jason's a guy I've known for a couple of years. He has a great website, he's got a great podcast, he does all kinds of good things. And his site and his podcast is Plans and Provisions. And I trust you'll give me the URL when you get ready to respond here. But I want you all to know that Jason is a very level-headed, practical guy. And even though he's not a member of the White Stripes, he is sort of a star, in my book, because he did a lot of great stuff in the homesteading and prepping and herbal realm. So, Jason, welcome to the show. Tell everybody hey, and tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, yeah, hey, thank you, Judson, for the nice introduction, and of course the feeling is mutual. I'm Jason. I've got a podcast. That's kind of the main contact I have with the outside world. I'm on a little homestead right in the middle of the Ozark Plateau in southern Missouri, where I've got about 5 acres, and we mostly are raising children, but then we're raising other things to kind of keep those children well fed and to give them a good experience. So that's kind of a nutshell of what our life looks like here.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean it's we've got a lot going on. It's been a busy spring for sure. I'm sure you've had a bit to do this spring as well.
Oh, sure. It's busy all the time,
Yeah.
But go ahead and run down those URLs for us. Let's get your information out there, and I'll put them again in the notes.
So the website is plansandprovisions.com, and the podcast is you can find it anywhere a podcast is to be found. Plans and Provisions Homestead Podcast. I've been doing that for, we got here in December of 2021 was when we showed up on our new property, and I had already had the podcast in the works. I've been kind of planning it for a few months and decided I'd wait until we actually showed up out here and kind of lend to the credibility a little bit. We were living in the suburbs of Phoenix at the time. And so, I started this podcast, what did I do? March of last year. So it's been about, whatever the balance is there, about 15, 16 months. So yeah. I do mostly interviews. I've had Judson on the podcast a couple of times. We've had some great conversations. Just interview all kinds of folks, some unknown homesteading families, some big names off of YouTube, some authors, just whoever seems to fit the bill for what I'm trying to do. Is, on one hand I'm learning, and so I'm looking for people that I can learn from, and then I'm hoping to share that knowledge with my audience so they can kind of glean some information from my experience, and then the expertise of the people I bring on the show.
Yeah, and I think what really differentiates your podcast and your work from, for instance, what I do. I totally fly by the seat of my pants, and you're like a plan it out, make it happen type of guy, And that's why you've been so successful. I mean, your podcast numbers are looking pretty good from what I can tell online.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that. It's I need a little more by the seat of my pants, and I'm trying to get to that. And I mean, I love your show, and I love that it's a show about herbs, but you just never know what Judson's going to be talking about. And you're such a great storyteller. Yeah, I have a format I tend to follow, but I've learned the art of the interview and the conversation. It didn't come naturally to me, honestly. I just never been one for a whole lot of small talk. If I know you and I know you well and there's a context, historically I've had good luck, but it's been a learning curve for me, but I feel like it's getting better and better.
Yeah, well, you do a great job, and I highly recommend your podcast. And I have, I tell everybody about it. I think it's a really good one, and but I think it would be good to know a little bit about your background. We're both foodies. We both come from the cooking and food world, and I think in a lot of ways that's kind of why we kind of click, why we kind of see eye to eye on things because. When you, speaking of being organized, I mean, when you work in a kitchen, first thing is your mise en place. You're going to put out what you're going to do. You're going to prep your vegetables, you're going to prep your meat, you're going to put all your ingredients out, and you're going to have them almost like a palette, right? Like an artist palette. And when it's time to cook, everything's right there. And so that seems to me kind of the way you do what you do. You've got it organized, you've got it ready to go, and it comes off very professionally. And I mean, is that just your nature, or was cooking the training for that? And then just tell us about your background. Where'd you come from? Where'd you grow up? And how'd you get into all this stuff?
Well, that's a good question. I hadn't really thought of it in those terms, but I did seek out some mentorship when I started the podcast. So yeah, I mean the mise en place, I definitely have that, and it didn't come naturally. I got some help, and I do have that set up, so it does makes it a lot easier for me to just jump in and get the job done. But it does take, it takes a little planning. You got to look at each situation. But yeah, my background, goodness, I haven't quite been a butcher, baker, and candlestick maker, but I feel like I've done I've got a crazy list of jobs. So let's have fun with that. I have been a baker. I was a coffee farmer. That's when I met my lovely wife. Was running a coffee farm. I have worked in the restaurant industry in every position, and that's definitely been a big part of how I've made my money as I've kind of traveled around the country. And I've worked on a lot of farms. I've mostly Hawaii. Did a lot of tropical agriculture out there in my I was out there 3 different times over the course of my 20s and 30s. And yeah, I worked on some homesteads, kind of helping rich folks take care of their properties. And I've been a roofer and a handyman, and I'm forgetting so many things I've done. But yeah, I think a lot of that lends to the lifestyle that we're leading now. Being in farming, I grew up in the suburbs, so very typical American life. Mom and dad worked full-time jobs. We went to public school. Food out of boxes, out of cans, out of the freezer. Never really stepped foot on a farm. But once I became an adult, I started to really feel this draw towards a rural life, and now people talk a lot about homesteading. But I felt really drawn to it. There was an allure to that life that I knew it was just so much different from what I was seeing, what was the kind of the status quo. So I think that a new lifestyle that I was living, and that was kind of the standard American life, was not what I was wanting, and then it really wasn't necessarily what was right. And so I kind of had that appeal to the rural life. And that just kind of led me on a path. Like I said, I traveled around, worked on a lot of different farms between farming and restaurants. It kept me fed and moving. I've lived in, I don't know how many states, but I think during my 20s I just about moved every 6 months. Just doing experiential things. I did do some college for a little bit, but we ended up, once I met my wife, I was running a coffee farm, and that was her first experience of living that lifestyle. We were on a 55-acre property, and did a little gardening, got some chickens for the first time. They were dead within about 2 or 3 weeks.
Pretty
typical. Yeah. That wasn't the last lesson that we learned when it comes to raising small animals. But once we got over to Oregon, which is where we went. So I met my wife. I've been on Maui on and off for several years. Loved the island, loved the culture. It was just, for me, it was where I wanted to be. I was out there, met my wife. I even said, I want to meet a local girl. I want to make this my home. Met the local girl. And she said, okay, I've been here for 30 years, and if you want to stay with me, we're leaving the island. I said, okay, all right, well, I've got some friends in Oregon. I'm into music. Let's go to Portland and mess around and see what we can get into. So we went over there in 2009, and we spent we were only in Portland for about 9 months. We realized, A, we weren't hip enough, and B, we really just wanted to get out to the country. So we went out to Yamhill County, the kind of the center of the Oregon wine country, and we spent about 3 years out there, where we did end up living on some rural properties, made some contacts with some farmers, and helped out with their CSAs and trade for veggies, and that was really kind of the kickoff for us. And then we took a little detour back to Maui, and I spent a year playing music in the bars out there, got that out of my system, and then we went back to Oregon, down to the Eugene area, and ended up, so this is kind of an interesting story. So, I hear a lot of people say, how do I meet people? How do I meet like-minded people? I want to get into homesteading. I want to get into herbalism. I want to get into all this self-reliance, kind of counter-centralized, systematic stuff, right? And I always say, one of the best ways to do it is to volunteer. So I was looking for a job on Craigslist or something like that, and I came across this ad for an internship with an herbal products company. And it didn't have any pay, and I knew it didn't have any pay, but I thought, you know what, I'll reach out and see what happens. Well, long story short, I ended up being the first intern for this Native American woman there in the Eugene area who, to say she was a hippie would be an understatement, but an amazing woman, took me under her wing, and I had some background in herbalism already, from years of just traveling and learning as I went, reading books and just kind of absorbing that information. But I became her first intern, and I was an unlikely intern for someone as left-leaning as her in her community was, because I didn't talk much about it, but I definitely tend more to the conservative side of things. But it was a great experience. But what ended up happening is, from that, we were new in town. I ended up meeting all these people, and as a result of that relationship, I then met another couple who owned several large properties, including a couple of pretty significant farms in the kind of organic and independent movement. One was and still is, a pretty significant seed producer, and another is a grain farmer. But long story short, we ended up going kind of to what I would consider kind of homesteading school. So we helped out, we stayed on their hobby farm, and we basically just learned how to do things like make butter, and make cheese. We started, that was where we first processed our own chickens and turkeys, and we helped, with the dairy cows and things like that. So, responding to one email and taking a leap and giving my time for free turned into a really great experience that really prepared us for what we're doing now. I don't know, 10, 15 years later, where as we entered our homestead here, we really didn't struggle with the with harvesting animals, which can be a real sticky point for new homesteaders. And we know how to can, and there's just a lot of things that we take for granted that we know how to do. That I talk to a lot of new homesteaders that are having to really start from zero. So it's one of the things I say, besides get out there and volunteer, is just get started wherever you are. Start learning. So basically after that we ended up in the Phoenix area for about 6 years, just because there was lots of money to be made, and we needed to kind of stabilize some of that and catch up with all of our traveling around and irresponsibility. But I always say we kind of invested that time where we could have been building wealth, physical wealth. We actually were building a wealth of knowledge and experience that's definitely paying off today.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's a wonderful experience. Yeah. All right, so it's interesting to me, and I could go off on many tangents. So many of the people I meet in homesteading and when permaculture and herbal medicine have a background in music. I mean, like my buddy Matt Powers, he teaches all these permaculture classes. He was the bassist for Blondie. I mean, he played with ZZ Top. I mean, the kid is just phenomenal as far as a musician. I think, to me, on the one hand, there's the creativity, but there's also that like deep interest, that deep passion. If you're going to learn something, like if you're going to learn to learn to play something off of a recording, right? Whatever format people are using these days, you have to like develop your ear, and you have to listen to it, and you have to really, you have to hear the interplay of the instruments, and you have to, whether you do it on paper or in your mind, you really have to transcribe what someone has done. And I think that, first thing that jumped out at me, you said, we're on 5 acres now. Well, I remember when I was 15 years old, and I picked up the book 5 Acres in Independence. You can do so much on 5 acres. But if you go on to 5 acres and you've never farmed, you've never had a garden, you've never raised any livestock, that 5 acres is going to whip you. And it's not a large piece of property, but it can be absolutely overwhelming if you don't know what you're doing. It's so important. And it's so great, in the internet age, we can pull up videos, we can talk to people, we can listen to podcasts. What really taught you? I mean, was it just hands-on volunteering, or did you read up on things and really get into the almost I guess you would say the intellectual or the analytical side of homesteading and farming and gardening and everything before you got started?
Well, I do think that tracing back that desire for, and you mentioned music, and one thing that kind of resonated with me or came to mind is that a lot of times, especially, well, let's just say rock and roll music and guitars and that type of music, I think American music, Americana, we're kind of tend to be a little bit on the fringe of society, not in a bad way, but there's a little bit of maybe a rebelliousness or a outlaw, countercultural, the outlaw concept. So I think that plays well into homesteading, because it is skirting around the mainstream and finding another way, and often that's a matter of looking back and finding our roots. But that being said, I think that for me a lot of it came down to just that desire, the experience that I had. Then once we had known we were moving, we were hunting for our house. I think once we had closed on our property, I got COVID, and I was pretty sick for a little while, and so I just laid in bed and watched YouTube and just absorbed anything and everything I could. And YouTube, doing what it does, led me to a lot of big names that most people would know, that are fairly familiar. not in the least of all would be like Joel Salatin. So I started picking up Joel Salatin books, and
he's the best.
He really is, and I know he's really big, and he's a big name.
Oh yeah.
And sometimes you feel like when you see a big name like that, maybe they're watered down, but man, his approach, his no nonsense approach, he's got a poetic ability to put things in simple terms, and just I was always attracted to systems. You kind of talked about that a little. I've always been attracted to that, and so I think that's probably been some of my best inspiration. And honestly, Judson, it's we're on our second season here on this homestead, and it's there's just this back and forth we're experiencing between overwhelm and making progress. And you hear it a lot. You get 1% better every day, and that's just kind of what we're doing.
Yeah, it's 2 steps forward, 1 back every day.
Yeah, and I think I've taken on some really good advice. I get to talk to, through my podcast, I get to talk to a lot of great folks who are way more experienced than me in homesteading and other things. And one of the things that I hear a lot is, don't move too fast. Better to make mistakes on paper than in real life. And I heard somebody say recently, 100 hours of thinking in 1 hour of doing. While that's not exactly practical, the idea I think is sound. And so that's kind of how we've played out the first year and a half, to where this second year, the first year we just jumped in. I remember last spring I was reaching out to you asking for advice on what in the world do I do? I've got this tilled up. Now what do I do? You gave me some good advice.
I hope I did.
You did, and it was like, all right, you got me moving. And but that's we've grown and worked on farms. We've done container gardening. We've done a little bit of this, but we've never worked a 3,000 to 4,000 square foot garden in the ground. Yeah. And
it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work, and it's hard to know what to do. So last year we planted everything all at once. We didn't get, we got it tilled kind of late, and we had a wet spring, so we didn't get any spring garden in. And we planted our summer garden, and we planted all of it at once. And guess what happened? We spent every waking moment fighting weeds and bugs and keeping irrigation going. But we grew food. This year we've been able to get a spring garden in. We've got a bunch of beautiful potatoes and brassicas, and we're just now kind of planting our summer garden, week to week. We're almost done with that. And it's just wonderful to see that process unfold, and I think that kind of the long answer to your question is, there's been books. I'm an avid reader. YouTube's my friend. I got some podcasts that I've leaned on pretty heavily. And then just really paying attention, enjoying the process, and just jumping in and tweaking things as you go. That's kind of been how I've found my way.
So you say you kind of got into herbs as you were traveling around and doing different things. What was your first experience with herbs? How did you get into them, and where are you kind of at now with things?
So, I said kind of, when I was given a little bio to my early life, I did grow up in the suburbs. I did grow up in that kind of standard American, 80s, 90s life. But I kind of left out my grandfather, and he's passed a few years back, but it was my mom's dad. And he actually lived about an hour and a half north up in, what's rural for that part of the world, but he had about a 5 or 10 acre property, and he was the kind of guy that he always had a new idea. He didn't tend to ever really finish any of them, and but he was always onto something. But he was really into herbs, and he had a little property. He had built a really nice nursery. He invested a lot of money into it, and it didn't last very long. But he was into herbs, and he was into herbs until the day he died. And so my first experience was him mentioning something about tea tree oil. Never heard of it in my life. And I don't recall really all the avenues of exposure that he gave me, but he kind of planted that seed for for herbs as a possibility, because it just wasn't on my radar as a child of the television and public schools. And so that did plant the seed. As I got older and started, traveling around, I just always had a field guide around and was kind of looking at what was growing wild. It just slowly absorbed more and more, wild foods, wild medicinal plants, and then just herbal remedies. So by the time I had made it to Eugene and was working for that herbal products company, I had a pretty good idea of the basics of herbs and basic preparations and things like that. Really got into medicinal mushrooms. People are calling them functional mushrooms. Definitely got into those. And yeah, it kind of just got to be one of those things I just took for granted in my life and didn't really continually research and expand, and certainly not even a fraction of what you've done with it. But herbs play a practical part in my life. We've got small children, and it's itchy season. We've got flea and ticks and chiggers and this and that, and so I've trained my kids pretty well. They know what plantain is, and they get a bug bite. They know to make a little chew poultice and put it on, and we make our own tinctures and our own deodorant, and
what's your deodorant formula?
Well, I'll be honest, my wife makes that, but it depends on the time of year. There's a winter formula and a summer formula. Because, in the winter, if you make it with too much, I want to say beeswax, it hardens too much.
Yeah.
I think the basics are arrowroot, baking soda, coconut oil, a little bit of beeswax, and then I think she's been using like a thieves oil and some tea tree. I could be, the proportions, I don't know if she makes it, but
yeah, it's interesting. You don't hear many people, making their own deodorant herbally. You see it sometimes in some books, but you don't hear about many people actually doing it.
I think the issue is that it's not in a nice fancy applicator.
Right, exactly.
Stick your finger in the jar and rub your pits. And so it's not necessarily for everybody, but yeah. So I mean, for us, herbs is just kind of a way of life, and we just kind of, like I said, we kind of take it for granted. I mean, I sprained my ankle last week, and nothing too serious, but I had made an arnica tincture last year. Good. So I had that to put on. Guess what? It bounced right back. So,
absolutely. Arnica's amazing stuff, isn't
it? It really is. It's something else. But yes, I mean that's kind of in a nutshell my herbal experience. It's nothing crazy, but
it's practical. You're doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I heard on another podcast you make a lot of kombucha, and you make a lot of vinegar. Have you done? Do you do a lot of herb vinegars? Do you that kind of thing?
Yeah, we I actually need to make more, but we do this. I did pick up quite a bit from this woman that I worked with in Oregon, but she called it tonigret, and it was I basically take whatever I've got around, but usually garlic. And I think fire cider is what people are calling it as well now.
Oh, yeah.
I'll just throw garlic and some onion, and I usually throw some turmeric root and oregano and a little peppercorn and just a little bit of this and that, and take a little shot every day, and that's I find that pretty good. But I do make some kombucha. It's back to kombucha season as it's warmed up, and I'm a little behind, but yeah, we definitely. We do our share of fermenting these days as well, and that's thanks to you, actually.
Really?
Your book, the one I interviewed you about last year, Herbal Medicine for Homesteaders.
Okay.
Preppers and permaculture people. You mentioned making sauerkraut in there, and you give a very rough Judson-style recipe for it, and that got me going. And I've been making not only that, but goodness, I just harvested some wild garlic out of the garden, and something I'm trying. When the wild garlic creates the little bud, it doesn't open for a bit. It looks like a caper.
Mm-hmm.
And so I actually threw those in with the bulbs, and I'm going to see if I can make wild garlic capers. So I'll keep you posted.
Yeah, that'd be good. I don't see any reason why that wouldn't work.
I think it'd be great.
Yeah, I often do like dandelion bud capers. That's a good substitute. Nasturtiums, little nasturtium buds. You know, it would be great is to throw those all together with the garlic, so you could get the pepperiness of the nasturtium, you could get the bitterness of the dandelion, you could get the brininess of the kombucha, you could get the savory funkiness of the garlic. I think, I might have to give that a try.
Yeah, that's been one of the things that over the last year since we've been here, I've just been crazy about just doing. We've always got ferments on the table. In fact, I had a pumpkin that like a fancy French pumpkin. I forget the variety that we grew last year, and I shredded that up a couple days ago. Actually, yesterday I think, and I just love it. You know,
That's good stuff too. Yeah.
Fermented food. Yep.
Have you tried turnip root?
No.
Oh, that's crazy. That is crazy. You do a turnip root sauerkraut.
Okay.
That's one I got from a Sander Katz book, and he didn't even say whether to use the roots or the tops, and he's just used turnip. And I had to think, like, well, what kind of turnips do they have in Greenwich Village or wherever he lives, you know? And I'm thinking it's probably the roots, right? So I tried both, and the tops just turn out like sauerkraut. You know, you wouldn't think anything of it. It's just like, you know, they're both brassicas. The root is funky and bittersweet. He said it was almost like bitter chocolate in flavor. Yeah, it's totally not like bitter chocolate in flavor. It's so totally not. But it's really, really good. Yeah.
We have some turnips out there that actually need to get harvested, so maybe we'll try that. Yeah, I've been crazy just to try anything I can, because I interviewed Sandor on the podcast.
Did you? Oh yeah, okay.
Early last year, and it was really before I knew anything other than how to make sauerkraut kombucha. And it's definitely been one of those things I've been geeking out on lately.
Yeah, I missed that episode. I'll have to go back. I've read all of his books. Man, that guy knows how to pickle some stuff. That's for sure.
Oh yeah, no, it's his most recent book, or at least as of the interview I had with him. I forget what it's, Fermentation Journeys. He went around the world and found just kind of very ethnic, traditional, and very, for lack of a better word, bizarre to the average American.
Yeah.
Ferments, and there's some great recipes in there, some great stories and pictures. But yeah, he's quite a resource.
Oh yeah, you know, Bill Mollison actually did the same thing. I guess he was after he had written all his permaculture stuff. He did a book on, he called it Ferments and Human Nutrition or something like that. The book came into print and went out of print immediately. I hope they will put it back in print. It's a lot like Sanders' Art of Fermentation, where he's just like going through different cultures and giving these different examples. Really good book. Really good book. If you can find a copy, you probably pay a couple $100 for it. I mean, it's crazy because it just went out of print so quickly. But I think in this age of ultra pasteurization, you know, we got to have this stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. We used to take probiotics, you know, and now I feel like we're so much healthier just making sure we've got a scoop of something on each plate we eat. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, there's such a broad spectrum in all the fermented foods. Yeah. So tell me what the plans are for the future. Where are you heading from now?
Well, you know, we're just taking every day as it comes right now. It's a busy time of year. So our goal is to close as many loops as we can on our property. You know, I see the first loop that we're going to be able to close is going to be our rabbitry. So we just started raising rabbits in the last year, and we've had 2 successful litters in the last 2 months, and I'll be harvesting my first rabbits for meat here in about 3 weeks.
Okay.
And so it's new for us, but we want to get away from the reliance on Cornish cross as kind of a small animal just because you have to buy them.
Yeah.
And you can't reproduce them, and they take imported feed. So a lot of what our vision with our homestead is I don't know if permaculture is the word, but trying to not only be sustainable but regenerative as well.
Yeah.
And so we actually planted 20-something hybrid willow trees as a privacy hedge along the front of our property that we'll be using to feed the rabbits. And we've got about 20-something hybrid poplar trees that I'm a little behind in planting as well. So we're kind of getting into these trees as a fodder tree system. So we're looking to establish that here. And I mean, it's really just about just trying to become as independent as we can, knowing that true independence, really comes to hopefully communities and not to any individual. But I think that we're just trying to go for that, and just raise these kids right and stay healthy, stay out of the way of all the crazy stuff going on in the world.
Yeah, there's certainly plenty of that. Have you looked into? You mentioned willow. So the first thing that comes to my mind is green woodwork. Have you looked into doing willow fencing and privacy screens and such as that?
I have heard of that, and I've looked into it a little bit, and it is something that I'm really intrigued by.
It's pretty cool stuff. You can grow your own trellises. You can grow your own arbors. You can, you get, trees you can coppice, like, locust is a good example, beech and such, but then you get the wands of the willow, and you can weave your own fences. You can do your own cages. All kinds of stuff. Because when stuff dries out, it's pretty hard. And you can do all kinds of architectural features and screens and, I don't know where you live, if you have any bad neighbors or you have any traffic noise or anything like that. You can weave these things up and grow some hop spuds up them, and you have a green wall that can totally block out the outside world. And from a security perspective, that's not a bad thing. If they can't see your house from the road, it makes it a whole lot less likely somebody's going to come on your property.
Yeah, that's part of. Yes, that's something that's on the list, and certainly on the radar. One of the reasons I just wanted to get these trees in the ground was, I've got a little privacy, and I've got the feed for the rabbits, but then I've got a nursery that I can propagate from.
Definitely.
And do things like that. So we'll see where it goes. We are looking to. We've got about 3.5 acre pasture, which. If we cut that off the property and didn't have it, we'd still be able to do. Most of our activities happen aside from that pasture. We do have a couple of beef steers we'll be harvesting this fall, but we're really thinking about pastured pigs.
Yeah.
And we're seeing the potential for coming up with a system. In fact, I had a conversation with Troy McClung of the Pastured Pig podcast and just put that out a couple weeks ago, and he gave me some really good advice on developing kind of a wagon wheel system.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Rotating them on a weekly. So that's kind of a bigger project that we're not jumping into. We almost got pigs this spring, and we just realized, we're just not there. We're pushed. We're pushed right at a good spot. We're whelmed. We're not quite overwhelmed. And I think that I think pigs would have just about sent us over the edge.
So they are high maintenance, especially when they're young. They really are. I grew up in East North Carolina, pig country.
Right.
And you have two big, I would say, especially if you have kids, two big concerns. One, are they going to take a lot of work? Two, are the kids going to turn them into pets? Because piglets are like puppies.
Yeah.
It's pretty tough. But then when they get older and they get aggressive and they get surly, then the kids kind of back off from them a little bit, hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah, we've just never raised them. I've worked on farms with goats and sheep and cattle and horses, and I just have never really been around pigs. So we're going to take it slow.
Yeah, and keep them. Well, my advice personally, and take it for what it's worth, would be to keep them as wild as possible, because the more you tend to pamper them, the more they tend to get sick easily. Like, I never forget when my uncle fed the pigs some leftover butter beans, and it almost killed them. I mean, seriously, just like lima beans. And he's like, yeah, I'm gonna throw them out. Just throw them, throw them in the slop of the pigs. Next thing you know, the pigs are on their side and they can't breathe. And I mean, we had to like put our hands. You don't want to put your hand in a pig's mouth, right? We had to induce vomiting.
Wow.
That was not fun. I don't know what it is about lima beans. I have no idea if there's a toxin in it that pigs can't digest, but I remember that very distinctly from when I was like 10 years old, because you don't want to put your hand in a pig's mouth, trust me.
Yeah, that's something I'd like to avoid. For sure. Yeah, no, we'll get to that. I think next spring hopefully we'll have some time this winter to get our infrastructure together and pick up a few piglets and just give it a try. I mean, we're not in any hurry. I think it's easy when you jump onto a homestead and there's all this content out there of all these beautiful properties and stuff people are doing. You want to get, you want that legitimacy, and but I think we're just kind of taking it slow. And I mean, I would say at the end of this year, we'll have all the meat we can eat. We just won't have any pork yet. So
yeah. Well, that's
we'll be buying our bacon.
Yeah, that's no problem at all. Yeah, and you're in Missouri. You can probably shoot a bear and get some bear bacon.
Yeah, I've got a friend with some property that they just started doing bear hunting a year or two. I think there's only going to be the second season this year. So they only got 10 in the whole state last year out of 400 tags.
Wow, really?
So yeah, but yeah, we'll hunting is a whole new frontier that I've yet to step into. I'm hoping to have some money this fall to get into that.
I tell you, I could take 10 in my backyard this winter.
Oh, really?
Yeah, where I live is adjacent to where there used to be a county dump. So we got bear. We got a lot of bear.
Wow.
Yeah, that's why I don't have chickens this year, is because the bear just tore everything up so badly last year. I've got to figure out how to bear-proof my property, which is not an easy task when you're talking about black bears that are 400, 450 pounds, and they just go by their nose. If anything gets in their way, they're just going to rip it down. I was at home last winter, and it was 2 years ago actually. I was sitting there, and I thought an earthquake had hit the house, and I followed the noise, and there was a bear scratching its back on the corner of my house.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that kind of like, just imagine like a big cow rubbing itself up against your house, except this cow has big claws and teeth, and
Wow.
yeah, it's the Grizzly Adams up here,
Yeah.
Okay, so people say to me that bear's gamey, it's gristly, you don't want to eat it. And what I always tell them, that's because you handled your bear meat the wrong way. A bear is a big animal with a lot of fat and very heavy fur, and it has a high body temperature. And you have to pick your bear, make sure that bear is calm and in the right spot at the very coldest day of winter. Take him cleanly, or her cleanly, skin it, quarter it out, get the meat back, and preferably by the time you get the meat back to your truck, it should be freezing. It should be that cold. And if you do that right, it's the best combination between beef and pork there is. It's like red meat with the richness of pork, and it's absolutely fantastic. I'd rather have bear bacon than pork bacon, honestly, or a bear ham. In fact, the original tasso, like they talk about tasso in Louisiana, that was a bear ham. But when people take their bears in the fall or the spring, which is, they really shouldn't go in the spring, and they drive them around and show them off to their neighbors, and, they haven't even field dressed the animal oftentimes, you're going to end up with some really bad meat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've never tried it. I've got a good friend in Oregon that does hunt everything, including bear. I mentioned to try some, so we'll see.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Well, you can definitely get a preview, because a raccoon's almost the same animal, just on a smaller scale.
Right.
Make sure you got a raccoon that's eating clean, raiding your cornfields, and wait till maybe trap him at night, a nice cool night, and If you like the raccoon meat, you're going to like bear meat.
Okay. Yeah, and I feel like I read a book recently that really goes into detail about that. Who wrote that one? Oh, that's right, it was you.
Yeah, I wasn't. I was going to say Hank Shaw or somebody like that. I'm a nobody. Come on.
Oh, well, I like to stack the Judson Carroll books on the shelf.
Well, that's appreciated. Now, when's your next book coming out? That's what I want to know.
Oh, that's a good question. I've given it some thought. I just need to figure out what I would write, and when I get that figured out, I'll start working on it.
I know you've had some ideas before. We discussed those, but you know what I think would be great is just what you just said. Just say, I came to a 5-acre piece of property with this background, and here's what I did over the first 2 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll start working up an outline and see what we can do.
Absolutely. Well, y'all, I hope you've enjoyed this interview with Jason. He's a good friend, great guy, always an inspiration. He's one of those guys that goes out and finds people who are doing interesting things and brings them to the world. I mean, he's interviewed everybody from Sandra Katz, who is a really colorful personality. We'll put that mildly, right?
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, to some of the most hardcore homesteaders and survivalists, and somehow, for some reason, he even wants to talk with me occasionally. But so Jason,
get you on again soon.
Oh, anytime. But Jason, it's been good talking to you, and the invitation's open to you anytime you like. And y'all, check him out. It's plansandprovisions.com, right?
That's right. Yep.
Plansandprovisions.com. You're going to love his stuff, and I'll have everything in the show notes, and anything that we mentioned during the show that I can find a URL or a note on, that'll be in the show notes. And so, y'all, I'll talk with you next week. Have a good one.
The information in this podcast is not intended to diagnose or treat any disease or condition. Nothing I say or write has been evaluated or approved by the FDA. I'm not a doctor. The U.S. government does not recognize the practice of herbal medicine, and there is no governing body regulating herbalists. Therefore, I'm really just a guy who studies herbs. I'm not offering any advice. I won't even claim that anything I write or say is accurate or true. I can tell you what herbs have been traditionally used for. I can tell you my own experience and if I believe an herb has helped me. I cannot nor would I tell you to do the same. If you use an herb anyone recommends, you are treating yourself. You take full responsibility for your health. Humans are individuals and no two are identical. What works for me may not work for you. You may have an allergy, a sensitivity, an underlying condition that no one else even shares and you don't even know about. Be careful with your health. By continuing to listen to my podcast or read my blog, you agree to be responsible for yourself, do your own research, make your own choices, and not to blame me for anything ever.